Hi everybody. 2024 February is in a few days, so we have a project for you. Dublin. Blarney's still over here. He's going to get surgery to remove something. Yeah. So, fingers crossed they're going to be quiet. Okay. So this is called, the block is called Take Heart. And I did 8 of them and then made it into a little wall hanging. Okay, I'll just put that here. Now, this is actually from Modern Domestic. And you can go to her website and print this out. Just do a search. I will provide the link for it. The link doesn't always work on Instagram, but on the Facebook it will. So she's at moderndomesticpdx.com. Okay. And the instructions are very good. Okay, so that's a free pattern. We will go over that now. Okay, so for every heart, what you need is 3 strips, 1.5 inches by 8, and I cut them 8 1/4 so that I can sew them and trim them down. So that's what you need for the heart. And then of the background, you need 1 square, 4.5 inches cut in half. And then you need 2 squares, 4.5 inches cut in half. And then you need 3 1.5 inch squares. And they're like this. All right. Now what I used for this was I purchased 0.25 of 5 different fabrics. So this is what I ended up having left over, and plus from my sample I have these. So I had plenty enough for 16, plus at least another 6 here, so plenty. I did use my leftovers for around here, the little border, and for the binding. So if you do a size and you have leftovers, my binding's scrappy, but that's what I do. Okay, so to start off with, this is your background. So I just want to take this as, if you have Stripology, it's a great time to use your Stripology ruler. And I just cut a 4.5 inch strip and then cut it into squares. This is folded, so there's 2 squares. So that's going to do 2. While they're still together, that's when I like to actually take my ruler and cut it in half diagonally, because they're nicely stuck together. So there's 4. Okay. So that's what I do for the 4.5. And then for the 4 inch, same idea, 4 inch strip. Again, if you have your Stripology, just use that. And then I cut it in half diagonally while it's still here. And then I get 4. So for each one, I only actually need 1 this size. Now note on the 4 inch square, in the pattern it calls for 3.5. And I actually do 4, and then I can trim it down. I found with 3.5, sometimes my squares weren't quite big enough. Okay, and then the 1 inch strip, especially for 1 inch, I like using Stripology, but you're gonna go along and cut these into 1.5 inch squares. For each block, you need 3, and you can see that I drew a diagonal line on 2 of them. So I set these aside for my block. So I'll set 1 of the 4 inch squares, and then 2 of the 4 and 2 of the 4.5. So there's 4 triangles of 4.5, 1 of the 4, and then my 3 1.5-inch squares. Okay, so that's for one block. And then the strips I set aside and I sew them together. Now, you can do them all the same colors. So if you only did 3 and you want to do these 3, that's great. I did a variety, so I just picked, like, say that. Some of these were longer. So one of the things when you sew these together, sew them so that one edge is that, and then the extras are on the same side, and then we can trim it down. Okay, so you can do a variety of these. Like, you can do that. And I actually paired them up, like I arranged them and I put them aside like that, and then like that, and then maybe this one, and this one, and this one. So I put these sets all aside, and then I sew them together to make this. Now this is approximately 8 1/4 inches long, a little longer than 8, just so I can trim it down. So if you're really good at sewing, you want to do 8, that's exactly what you need. Okay, so once this is done, what I'm going to do, I'm going to set this aside, that's for one block. I'm going to trim this down to 5 1/2 and 2 1/2-inch section. So 5 1/2, I just want to make sure that that's lined up. 5 1/2, and then a 2 1/2. Okay, that's what that looks like. Okay, now I'm just going to switch these around this way so you can see. When they're like that, how your heart is going to be is like this. So this is going to be the heart. You want these two together. Or you can do the same thing, but with these together. So make that decision once you cut these aside. And then, so if I want my heart like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, which I actually drew a diagonal line across, 2 of them per heart, and I used my Fixon one that I can iron off. So I just took that and my little handy ruler. This is a little hard to do. Okay, so I did that. That goes on the bottom. We're just going to move Dublin away from his brother. And then this one goes here. Okay, and then this one actually gets sewn here. So how it looks then is like that. Okay, that's going to go like that once it's pressed. So if you lay this, I actually went around and put my little group of squares with this block, and then I did all this. This is really important for the block. So if you went the wrong way, and this was here, you can see the heart doesn't have that same effect. Okay. Okay. So we're going to have it, actually for this one, we do have it this way. So I take that and then I sew these here. Okay. So that's what it's going to look like once it's sewn. You can see that. Okay, so sew there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this. I just put my 1/4 inch line on the stitch line and trim this. Okay, and then I'm going to press them. When I press them, that actually makes the heat, gets rid of the line. My iron actually turned off. Took too long getting ready, I guess. I definitely used my best press when I was pressing these down nice and flat. And there you go. Okay, so now the next step, so we have it like this, and now we are like this. The next step, we're going to take this and sew it here. So we just take that and we sew it along there. Okay, so now that turns out like this. Now, what's important too is you don't want to press this way. I guess you could, but I found it a lot easier to do the next step if we press this way, because I want to see those two corners better. So that's what it looks like now. And then the next step is we actually trim this off. And how we're going to do it is we put our 1/4 inch line of this ruler on there. So that's on that point and that point. Hopefully we can get it lined up for both these. It didn't always quite work, but it's more important that I have it on those 2 points there. And then we trim off these little triangles. There we go. Now this is where we take the 3.5 that the pattern says, but I used 4 inch. So I go to my little pile and I grab my 4 inch and I'm gonna sew it onto here. What's really important is this is a 1/4 inch away. We really want to make sure that we don't sew too short. We want to get those points in there. Otherwise we're going to have a little gap, right? And what I do is I take this like this. And that should line it up, but I can kind of feel that I have equal amounts covered of that fabric and that fabric. So I know it's pretty centered. It's actually a little more. And then when I sew it, I want to make sure I hit this point. You can actually see it under my fabric, so I'm lucky for that. So that's where I'm going to sew it, right along that 1/4 inch. And if I'm finding if I have to make it bigger than a 1/4 inch to get those points, then I do. Okay. So once that's sewn, that's what that looks like. And you can see I hit underneath there, right there and there. And then, so when I go to press this, there's no hole. If I did it too small, you would see that hole. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah. Anyways, so I'm gonna press this. Whoops, sorry, puppy. He's hardly a puppy. He's gonna be 16 in March. I just had to shake my iron up to make sure. Okay. You move that. So this is, you can see if I did 3.5, if I did everything perfect and used the 3.5, it should be square. But because I used 4, I know there's plenty, and now I can go up here and trim this off just so it's at 5.5. So I'm just trimming off this extra part. I'm not worried about the rest. Okay. Okay. So that's my heart so far. Now the next step is taking the 4 triangles that we got from the 4.5 inch, and we're gonna sew them on to this side, and then to this side, and then this side, and here. Now, the easiest way I find to do this is I actually take these to my machine, I fold this like this, you can even do this with an iron, and I just give it a finger press, if you're by your ironing table and you want to iron that. And then when I sew this onto here, I'm going to flip this here and make sure that point goes right there. So right where I pressed it. And then I know it's centered and it looks, you can see there. So, okay. And then I sew the other one like that. And then I go to my ironing board and I press them. So now they look like this. Okay. And now my next step, and you can see when I went to my ironing board, I pressed these. I also took this, because I'm at my ironing board anyways, and pressed it like that. Okay. So now when I bring these over, I can line that up like that to that ironing piece right there, that little pressed line. Okay. And I sew that there. And then I sew that there. And I just make sure that's centered. Okay. Usually too, and hopefully, when you sew this and you're doing a 1/4 inch, it should come right into that corner. If it doesn't, I wouldn't worry about it because we trim off a little bit. But anytime that we do that kind of join, that's usually where the 1/4 inch should be. Okay. So once we sew that, then we can press them. And now we have the heart. Whoops, and a loud dog. Okay, so poor Blarney, you need to be quiet. This is where we're going to trim the block, sorry, dog getting attention, to 7.5 inches. The most important part about sewing this or trimming it is we don't want to trim this off the point. That point is really important. We have wiggle room on these because there's lots of white. So we don't want to trim that off so much that we take that point off. So if we trimmed it like that, then when we sewed it, there would be no nice point. So what you do is you take your ruler. I like a square ruler because you can see the 7.5. So on the square ones, you can see that nice square. So I can line that up. And what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to start at the bottom. Maybe Mike can come on this side and we can see. So there's my 1/4 inch. So I want to keep that right there. So I'm not going to trim any more than that. So I'll trim that bottom part off later, but I want to make sure that that's what's there. Now, ideally, the center of this should be 3 1/4 because this is 7.5. So that lines up pretty good. I can trim that. So I'm just going to trim this like that. And then this like this. Okay. And then I can see that I can now just trim a little bit off there and still leave a 1/4 inch on the heart. So I'm going to flip it around like this. Line this nice and square there. So 7.5, 7.5. That's why I really like square rulers. Just trim off that and that, and I protected my bottom corner. Oh, sorry guys. So that's protected. Okay, and then whoops, sorry puppy. Then we just sew these together. Now you can do all of them the same. Just use 3 colors. I sewed them into 4 rows of 4. Super sweet, right? Then I had leftover pink, so I used that, and then I used a variety of my burgundies, and I actually subcut these, so one is this long, and then this one is longer, this one's shorter, this one, so it's not, it looks, you know, not like, I didn't end up with one long burgundy, one long gray, and then a short, so it's varied. And then you can see my cute little label. And because this label is small, all I did is wrote JC 2024. So on the back of these labels, I always write usually my name and then the year. Okay, so when we send out this video, we'll send out a link. And then also, if you want, when you get to you can always email us and we can give you the fabric requirements that I use for this size. This is my notes, but it'll be printed out. Okay? So, thanks everybody, and happy Valentine's Day.